Hi. So I'm here with the books that I read in December, but unfortunately I didn't love any of them. I'm really sad about it. And I'm not like a huge fan at this point of negativity when it comes to art, because it's subjective. And I might really like something and somebody else might not, and vice versa, and there's nothing wrong with that, which should also mean that there's nothing wrong with being negative about something that you didn't like. But I don't really want to focus on that. I kind of wanted to steer away from that on this channel. But I did tell you what books I was going to read in December. And I do want to talk about them, so I'm going to try and be gentle. I'm not going to bash them or anything, but I will talk about why I didn't like them. So I have them here in the order that I read them. So the first book that I read was The Christmas Clash by Suzanne Park, which this was not a bad book. I thought it was cute. It just was not really what I was expecting, I guess. So this, first of all, is not as Christmassy as the cover and the title make it out to be. But this follows two people whose families own restaurants in the food court, and the families hate each other. Therefore, the children must also hate each other. Now, the children of these families work at the restaurants to help their parents, but to make money, they work at booths in the mall. So the girl works at the Santa photo booth taking pictures, and the guy works at the Santa VR next door. So there's some Christmas stuff about that because they talk about taking Santa photos and doing Christmas virtual reality things. But basically the main story is that the mall is going to be closing by the beginning of January. And so it's about them working together to try and save the mall so that their parents don't have to close the restaurants because they're in the food court. Now, it does talk about on the back of the book about how they hate each other, but there's very, very little of that. There's a little bit at the beginning of them kind of getting on each other's nerves, but they are friendly with each other almost from the very beginning. It's just that they have to be secretive about it because their parents are rivals, which, whatever. It's fine. It was misleading. So they're friendly pretty much the entirety of the book. And there isn't much talk about Christmas besides the fact that they work at Christmassy booths in the mall. A lot of it is about them trying to save the mall and doing a lot of research and meetings, and I didn't think it was that interesting, unfortunately. I did enjoy the parts where the guy and girl were bonding, and it was cute. It just wasn't as interesting as I thought it could have been. And I also thought it was a little weird, in the story, the people who work at the photo booth are trying really hard to figure out ways to get people to come get pictures with Santa because the VR booth is taking away their customers because people want to do that instead. And I just feel like Christmas-themed virtual reality is not a replacement to visiting Santa. You can't sit on Santa's lap and tell him what you want for Christmas by going to a VR. It's just a fun experience. I feel like they're two completely separate things. And I feel like if they were next door to each other, they wouldn't be, I feel like it wouldn't be a competition. They're two completely different things. But anyway, that was the thing that I thought was a little weird. But anyway, this was cute. It wasn't, meh. The next book, I didn't enjoy. And that was All I Want for Christmas by Maggie Knox. And I'm really sad because I was really excited to read this. I thought it was going to be super cute. So this is about two characters who are in a reality show singing competition. And they get paired up together in one episode. And then everyone loves them together so much. So they have to agree to continue and complete the competition as a duo. But they hate each other. So this is going to be awful. First, this is in dual perspective. It's not every other chapter tells you if it's from the guy's perspective or the girl's perspective, but it's written in the third person. So it's technically one perspective. And that's fine, but unnecessary. You don't need to tell me whose chapter it is at the beginning because it's written in the third person. So I'm going to know who it's about fairly quickly. I also just felt that there was very little to the characters and to their scenes with them together. So this book, the first half takes place during the singing competition, which only lasts a month, which I thought was strange because it's like American Idol, but for country singers. So someone gets kicked off every week. So you'd think it'd be at least 8 weeks, but it was not. And the second half is about them having to get back together the next year at Christmas time as a reunion. So it takes place over an entire year, but it's just the month of December for each half. of the book. So it's like the month of December in one year, and then it's the month of December in the next year. So during the competition, when they were supposed to hate each other but start to bond or whatever, there was like none of that. They had like 4 conversations that we got to see, and they just got on each other's nerves out of the blue for no reason every single time. They'd be having a good time, and then all of a sudden they were like, oh, I can't stand that you just did this thing. And I can't remember like a specific example, but they all felt very out of place to me. And a lot of their irritation with each other and then infatuation with each other and going back and forth felt like it was just the narrator telling me that they got on each other's nerves instead of me seeing it happen and have it like be believable. Because I saw it happen, I got to see it happen a couple times, but it was so out of the blue. It was very out of place. So I wasn't really rooting for the characters. I didn't really care about them, and I was skimming it the last chunk because I didn't care. Unfortunately, this was a big miss for me. And then I read What Light by Jay Asher, and I enjoyed this one. This one was good. What Light is about a girl whose family owns a Christmas tree farm, and they also own a Christmas tree lot in California. So every year, the day before Thanksgiving, I think, they drive down to California and stay there until after Christmas to work at the Christmas tree lot. And she has a friend in California that she hangs out with every year when she goes, and so it's about her being at the lot with her parents and hanging out with her friend, and also about how their parents aren't sure they're going to be able to keep the Christmas tree lot open past that year. This might be their last year, so there's talk about that and worry about that. But it's also about her meeting a boy, obviously, but the boy is rumored to have been involved in something dangerous, and so she's not sure if she should get to know him. And there is a lot about her like getting to know him and wondering if it's a good idea and trying to find out what actually happened. And I really liked it. And I liked that it wasn't just, like, oh, he might be dangerous, but he's cute and he's nice to me, so I'm going to kiss him. Like, there was none of that. Like, it was, like, everyone was serious and cautious about the situation. And it was talked about a lot. And it was talked about like what actually happened and with who and why and what were the circumstances, and because of all of these things, do we think it's something that will be repeated? So like it was good that they were like dealing with it and talking about it and not just brushing it off or like romanticizing it, I guess. So it was good. I didn't love it, but it was good. I enjoyed it. And then I read Anna and the Swallow Man by Gabrielle Savitt. And I really enjoyed this as well, but the farther I got into it, the less I liked it, unfortunately. So this is about a girl named Anna who is 6 or 7 at the beginning of the story. It's at the very beginning of World War II, and her father is killed when he's at work, and she's waiting for him to come home, and he doesn't come home. And while she's waiting for him to come home, she comes across this man who is worried about her because she's just this little girl who's outside by herself. And he speaks to her in a bunch of different languages to see if she speaks any of the languages that he speaks. And we like this because she speaks a lot of different languages. She's very intrigued by him. And he ends up calling a bird over to them, and it lands on his finger. She's very fascinated. She feels very comforted by him. So she ends up following him. And they just travel together, pretending to be father and daughter, trying to stay out of harm's way, basically for the entirety of World War II. And so it's basically just about them and their relationship and the things that they do for each other, and it was really sweet, and I really enjoyed it. But it started to take a bit of a turn, which was interesting, but then not. And that's why I didn't really like it the more I read. Now, here's where I'm going to get into, like, possible minor spoilers. So, it will show on the screen when there's spoilers, and then it will all have unmute on the screen when you can unmute it if you don't want to hear any spoilers. So I'm not going to go into like specifics, but I am going to talk about like the general way the story went. So if that is a spoiler to you, then mute it now, and then on the screen it will say when you can unmute it. So the story started to take a really interesting turn. There was a lot of really mysterious stuff that started happening. Things that needed an explanation, and some things that felt like there was no explanation. There was even a couple things that happened that felt supernatural. And then none of it was explained, and then the story ended very abruptly. And I just felt like all of the things that started to make the story really like intense and interesting towards the end were really pointless. And it felt like the author put those things in there to make the story really intriguing, but then was like, oh, I don't know why I actually did this and I don't have a reason for it, so I'll just end the story. That's what it kind of felt like. So that kind of left me feeling a little deflated, a little empty when the story was over. It felt kind of like, what was the point a little bit? So that's why I liked it less as it went on. It felt a little pointless. So that was sad. But a really cool thing that I want to talk about from this book is shortly after finishing this book, I was cleaning my shower and I started to get flashes of this World War II movie that I'd seen recently. And I was trying to remember what movie it was because I wanted to tell someone about it because I remembered that it had really sweet moments in it and that it was really a really good movie. And I couldn't remember what it was called or even what it was about. I just kept seeing images of it. And then I realized I was not thinking of a movie. It was this book that I read that I was remembering so vividly I thought it was a movie that I had watched. So that's cool. So anyway, I loved the writing and I loved the relationship with Anna and the Swallow Man is all we know him as. I loved aspects of the book. I just didn't really love the way it ended up, I guess. The last book is one that I'm quite disappointed in. That's The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton. I'm going to tell you what it's about first. Okay, so it's about this 18-year-old girl named Nella who just gets married to this like 36-year-old dude, and she moves to Amsterdam to live with him and his two servants and his sister who is very mean to her. And the man that she married is very distant but not mean. He's just not around a lot and he keeps his distance from her, but whenever they do talk or do have to go out together, he's very kind and gentle and nice to her. So there's like a little bit of like mystery, like what did he gain in marrying her and why is he so distant, but also nice? Like he doesn't seem like a mean man, so what's going on with that, right? And he ends up purchasing her this cabinet that's been like made out of like beautiful wood, and inside the cabinet is a replica of their house, so it's like essentially a dollhouse. And she doesn't really want it because she's not a child, but so that he doesn't feel bad, she ends up finding someone who can make furniture and stuff like that to go inside the house. So she ends up hiring a miniaturist to make miniatures to go inside the dollhouse. And the miniatures are very exact. It's kind of scary how close they look to the real things. And they are either predicting or creating the future. So the miniaturist makes her things that she asks for and things that she doesn't ask for. And the things that she doesn't ask for are things that how would she know? How would she know about this person or this thing or this and that? And then there are certain things about the miniatures that like come true, if that makes sense. So it's all very mysterious. But then a bunch of drama ensues and also it gets very depressing. And then pointless stuff happens. I liked the writing. And even before the story was established, I was super interested and I wanted to keep reading just because I really enjoyed the writing style and the way the story was told. So even though I didn't really know what was going on yet and not much had happened, I still was hooked and I wanted to keep reading. It's very readable. So that was good. And I really liked that about it. And I was really enjoying it for a big chunk of the story. Like a very big chunk. But then it became pointless. Like literally pointless. The whole story is pointless. So I'm going to get into like a little bit of a minor maybe spoiler section again, that I'm not going to go into any specifics and spoil anything specific, like any like details, but I am going to tell you the general gist of things happening or concluding. So if you don't want to hear about that, mute it. Nothing gets explained. Nothing about the mysteries around the miniaturist are explained or concluded or anything. None of that. So we don't know what was going on. We know who the miniaturist is related to. That's it. There's no other information that we get that solves anything throughout the story. Any of the intrigue and the mystery. It's all just, we don't care. And on top of that, none of the miniaturist stuff needed to be in the story, which bugs me even more that, like, when I tell you what the story is about, the main focus is about this miniaturist stuff, because that's what they make the main focus feel like. Like, that's what the intrigue is around, and that's what everything keeps coming back to. Anytime something new happens, it brings you back to the miniaturist and the miniatures that she created, and then none of it is explained. But if the miniaturist stuff wasn't in it, like if there was no dollhouse, and there was no miniaturist making things for the dollhouse because there was no dollhouse, nothing about the story would have been different. It would have been exactly the same. The miniaturist does not affect the story whatsoever. It didn't need to be there. It could have just been a dramatic and depressing book without a mystery of magic. And then the other thing that I thought was a little weird about the narration was it's written in the third person, but Nella thinks a lot of things a lot, which is totally fine. So it'll be like, oh, I wonder about this, Nella thinks, which is normal, but it's not in italics or quotes or anything. It's just so sometimes it took me out of the story a little bit because I was like, why is it all of a sudden in the first person? But then I'd be like, oh, Nella thinks at the end of the sentence. But then sometimes there would be just Nella's thoughts without Nella thinks. So randomly it would be written in the first person, even though it's a third person narrative. So that was a little strange and took me out of the story a little bit. Like overall, until I realized the story was pointless, I was enjoying it. Even through all of the dark stuff, like there's some dark stuff in this. It's very heavy. Like it's not that heavy, but it's heavy. It's heavy for me at least. So the warnings about this are that there's a brutal animal death. It was terrible. It almost made me feel sick. And then there's also just like depressing stuff. And people like it gets so depressing, you guys. So this was an interesting one for me. I don't think I have anything else to say about it. I'm really sorry that I ended this month on like a negative note. Well, I guess no. We've started the month on a negative note because it's January now. I actually filmed this before. I filmed it on New Year's Eve, I think, and I didn't like it. So this was me filming it again. But there is a favorite reads of 2022 video coming shortly after this one, so that one will be positive. Anyway, that's all. Bye!